All right, let's make sure the streaming is working. Is the streaming working? It's not showing up. There it is. Okay, cool. All right. Those of you that have had my class before, you've seen all this. It's basically the same. Those of you that haven't, welcome to my class. It's me, Professor Holt, Mr. Holt, Riley. I don't care what you call me. I don't have a doctorate. Otherwise, I'd be far more financially stable. Oh, nuts. Hold on. Why isn't it? Oh, I'm in the wrong slide. That makes sense. Okay, so there's going to be some poor humor and sarcasm. It's just who I am.
It's hilarious. You should laugh.
Nia is in a minority there. I will occasionally disparage historical characters. If that bothers you, I'm sorry. Also, I'll make terrible references. There's going to be some in this slide. Also, sometimes I don't get a lot of sleep, like last night, so today's going to be a thing, which is going to make the rest of them worse. But hey, I'm not here to make this a bad class. Again, those of you that have had my class before, you know how I roll. If you haven't had my class before, I'm not here to hurt you. But you should definitely show up for class and do the tests and the papers, and you'll be fine. Just try to stay conscious during class and maybe take some notes, and you'll be all right. So this is how I do history. Less names, dates, battles, and treaties, and more who, what, where, when, why, and how. We're going to talk about the Spanish-American War this semester, so this actually works better than what I did last semester with Napoleon, because I wasn't fully ready. So Spain and America had a war. Cool. Where largely Cuba. We'll talk about some other islands as well, especially the Philippines. It happened in 1898. Again, those of you that have had my class know this, but for those of you that haven't, don't worry so much about the years unless I point at it and say, boy, this is an important year, you might want to know this, in which case, maybe write that down. For the most part, when I give you guys years, it's because I like timelines for my own mental compartmentalization. I like seeing things on a timeline and knowing that this goes here and that goes there. And if we talk about something in 1896, that means it happened before this. And if we talk about something in 1900, it happened after this. But I'm not going to be too worried about specific things. Again, unless it's boy, this is a really super specific, important date that I need for a question because this is still technically a class. So don't worry too much about that. This is the important question. This is what essays are going to be about. I'm not going to hit you guys with a bunch of essays. There's literally 2 essays this entire class. That's your 2 papers. Actually, if this was a graduate level course, most of the tests would be essay-based, and that's a little more fun, honestly. But we can't concentrate on specific things like we could in a graduate level course. So what are you going to do? But anyway, the why and how is why history still exists as a class. Why did the war happen? There's no specific event. Even World War I, we say, oh, well, it happened because a dude got shot. Well, sort of. The Spanish-American War was sort of because of economics. There was this idea that Cuba should be free from Spain, which we'll get into. This whole imperialism thing, which is going to be 2 whole chapters before we even get to the war. So, yeah, there's no cut and dry answer to hardly any of these. Again, if you've had my class before, you know what this is. And this is only a question on a test in my 103 class, but it's always nice to know just as a history student. The historical lens is very simply how we see the past based on the present. So like in the Cold War, when it was capitalism versus socialism, we'd look at the past and see fallen empires as somehow socialistic and be like, well, they fell even though they were very powerful because they were like the Soviet Union, therefore the Soviet Union is going to fail, fingers crossed, let's hope we don't get nuked. Which is where we're going to eventually go at the end of this semester, hopefully, because I've got one of my favorite movies / documentaries of all time that I would like for us to get to by the end of the semester. I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to just have to post the link from my online class because I got copyright bombed the last time I tried to show even a little clip online last time. So I'm just going to post the link for them. History, inside joke. You know, why do we care about the Spanish-American War? Because nothing really came of it unless you live in Cuba, the Philippines. What was the other island? Guam? I think it was Guam. But, you know, those who fell to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Spain's not really a world player, or really hasn't been a world player since the Spanish Armada. And one could argue America's not imperialistic. I would say that's a bad argument. But we do have to learn from history because it's our legacy. Because even if we don't learn from history, it's still going to shape the present and the future. And especially if you do learn from history and then look at the present and the patterns of things, it's like, oh, boy, this has happened not that long ago. And it happened before that, and it happened again before that. It seems like people don't learn. And then this idea of the highlights, this was just something I came up with while I was probably very sleepy at work when I was doing security. Why don't we just do the fun stuff, the wars, the exciting, the fighting stuff? Why we care about the Spanish-American War, because that was relatively minor. We barely were involved there. Why do we care about all the political stuff? Because, as I told my class yesterday, we start with the Reconstruction in this class, which to me is, I'll be honest, the most boring part of history ever. I really don't like the Reconstruction. It's boring. But it's extremely important. Because it's like you've got the Civil War, which is pretty exciting, and then you've got the Reconstruction, which is just like, we got to pick up the pieces because we done screwed up. But it's also extremely important for everything that comes after, so you got to do it. But it's incomplete. It's just, there's no context for why the fighting is happening. And then I do this awful analogy of Lord of the Rings with just the fight scenes. And having been properly educated by my Lord of the Rings nerd with the extended editions of all three, yeah, if you just have the fight scenes, there is no context as to why there's a dwarf and an elf flirting over murdering orcs, or why there's walking trees, or a thing that I didn't put here. Why are there ghosts? And why are the ghosts fighting big elephants? I don't understand. But there is a lot of context there, and it is all very important. And there's even context beyond the movies, because again, I had the lore hound friend telling me what was going on beyond all of that. So, yeah, I actually do need to get rid of this disclaimer, because now I know a little bit about what's going on. So history follows these patterns that we can't look at individually. We can't just take a piece out and say, okay, well, let's just look at this one thing and we'll be done. That's why I told my class yesterday, even if you wanted to watch like a 2-hour documentary on World War I, which again, we barely had any involvement in, you don't even start with, and then Archduke Ferdinand got shot. You have to start with all the stuff leading up to that, and all the political turmoil, and all the arms race, and all the pressure that led to that one shot that then led to the war, and then the war after that. Like all of that doesn't exist in a bubble. So here, we had the Civil War, which those of you that had me last semester, we didn't quite get to, but everything we were doing last semester led up to the Civil War. The Civil War, of course, destroyed the Southern economy. We had the Reconstruction, the move west for land and opportunity, this land and resources and British influence, which we'll get to, push for industry, so the Industrial Revolution, eventually immigrants pushing into America in greater numbers because of this land and opportunity and need for workers and labor. America going to war like Europe for land and power, eventually getting involved in the wars in Europe, World War I to a very small degree, the Great Depression, World War II, the Cold War, and everything after that. And none of that is completely separate from anything else. So even though history does exist in patterns, and the patterns do tend to follow, patterns, I guess, losing my words here. You can't really predict the future based on the past, but you can still see the way things are going. But it can inform us to make the future better than it could be. Avoid mistakes of the past, like a land war in Russia. Napoleon and Hitler both did a bang-up job with that. And build on the past achievements, because we do stand on the shoulders of giants. We're not starting from scratch. History has started from scratch a couple of times, and it wasn't pretty. And another reference there, war never changes, unless you're a fan of Metal Gear Solid, in which war has changed. Okay, so, show up for class. That helps. If you're not here for 2 weeks in a row, I have to assume you're not showing up for class anymore. Now again, that's 2 weeks in a row, that's 4 days consecutive. That doesn't mean if you miss, say, next week and then you're here for like the next 2 months and then you miss a day here and a day there, that I'm going to kick you out. That's not how that works. If you're gone for 2 weeks in a row, then I got to kind of question what's going on. So you're fine. It's very lenient. Also, if you email me and be like, hey, I've got the plague, or hey, there's a lot going on, or whatever. Just, if you're out, fine. But like if there's extenuating circumstances, just let me know. Email me. I'll put up my email here in a minute. All the material comes from the book. This is the book. This is the first edition of the book, so it won't look like this. I suggest you get the book. It's not, I won't say it's required in that I'm not going to make you bring it to class and check it off on for a grade or something. I just bumped the mic. That was good. Like some professors do. But I would strongly suggest it. I would also strongly suggest you get it for as cheap as possible. But it's good to have the book because that's where all the material comes from. And if you ever need to like read ahead, it's all here. Also, make sure you do the exams and the papers because if you don't do them, I can't really grade them. Or rather, I can grade them, but it's a 0, and you don't want that. And ask questions because that's the only way I know how to give you an answer. I don't read minds, otherwise I would have gone insane by now. Speaking of questions, that's my email. I've got it on the syllabus as well. I'll bring up the syllabus here in a minute. The syllabus should already be online. Riley.holt@marion.edu. Email me whenever you need. You can bug me before or after class. Just walk up here and talk to me if you need something. That's fine. Or ask in class. That's cool too. It's fine. Also, sometimes I just don't sleep. So if you email me at like 2 a.m., I might answer it. If you email me at 2 p.m., I might be asleep. So there's no telling. The thing is, I will get to you as soon as I can. It's just there's no telling when that'll be, especially during the weekend. I might be dead ass asleep at 2 p.m. on a Saturday, or I might be awake at 2 a.m. on a Saturday. So, I don't know. I'm trying to get my life together, but, you know, no telling. Also, no, we don't do aliens. Okay, any questions about any of this before we move on to the syllabus? I mean, again, most of you have seen this. I use the same thing. I'm lazy. Okay, cool. All right, syllabus is basically the same too, but it's always good to have a syllabus up. Let's duplicate. Bring this up here. Okay, I guess this one's Monday, Wednesday, isn't it? 8:30 to 9:45, I think. Yeah. All right. So, this is us. Here's my email again. Fancy course description. Here's the text. You do not have to get first edition. I just have first edition because that's what was given to me. I'd like you to get a hard copy, but again, if you can't, whatever. I'd like you to show up for class. There's 2 papers. We'll get to that in a moment. There's extra credit on the test. Again, those of you that have my class, you know how that rolls. Right. So, actually do the... Okay, we'll talk about the papers right now. Okay, so, papers. I've got around March-ish. Whoopsie. Here we go. Probably not March 9th, but March-ish. March. It's like chapter 15. It's literally chapter 2 of this book. It's the migration west. A lot of it's like railroad. A lot of answers will be the railroad, Homestead Act. But there's also lots of other stuff you could talk about: Reconstruction, Western expansion, Industrial Revolution, whatever you want. 2 to 3 pages, double spaced. Give me a bibliography page. That one doesn't count for your page count. Email me if you have any questions. Email me if you want to do a different topic, because I want to make sure that you're not overdoing it or underdoing it. Because some people are like, I want to write about railroads. Like, cool, that's a really broad topic. That's not going to work for a 2 to 3 page paper. You need to really, really narrow that down. Because I could do a 2 to 3 page paper on like the development of the railroad line in Lake City. So yeah. Yeah, so don't worry so much about the topic right now. We'll talk about that more later. I'll post this up on Blackboard in a little bit. About a little bit, I mean like probably next week. But I prefer that you print them out and bring them in. This is for you guys. For those of you online, email them to me at my email address that I've already posted. If you can't physically bring them in, again, those of you that have had my class before, you know how this rolls. You can also email them to me. It's just that I'm going to have a ton of emails. That said, if you are going to email them to me, please use a Word document. I think that's actually down here. Where's it at? Here we are. If you're going to email your paper, please attach it as a Word document or like a PDF. The shared Google Doc thing doesn't always work. A lot of times it like makes me send you a permission request or something, and then by the time I get it back, it's been lost in further emails that I'm getting. So please attach it as something, a Word document or a PDF, if you're going to email it to me. If you come in early and like print it out in the library or print it out after class and bring it to me or whatever, that's the best. But if you're going to email it, please email it as some kind of attached document. That goes for you online folks too. Please attach it as something that makes it easier for me. Let's see. So let's go back up here real quick. Don't plagiarize. I've had a little bit of that already. I don't want to do that. Don't handwrite your paper. I've dealt with that in the previous school. Please try to turn them in when they're due. I've not been super strict about this, but I kind of need to. Spelling and grammar count to a certain extent. If it makes it harder for me to read, I am going to pull some points, but I'm not going to go through and mark like every incorrect comma or whatever. But if it's like, if it feels really unprofessional and I can't tell what I'm reading, you're definitely not going to make as well as if it was a well-flowing paper. As far as the tests, there'll be 3 tests in the final exam. They're all structured the same. Multiple choice, short answers. Short answers, again, for you new folks, they're like a word. For example, to use what we talked about just a moment ago in the introduction. Where did the Spanish-American War take place? Cuba. One word answer. That's all you need. If I wanted to do extra credit, extra points for the other islands that were involved, Philippines and Guam, I think. That sort of thing. I have here several short essays. I was writing this when we were kicked out of the continuum halfway through the semester when COVID hit, and I was trying to make things up as I went. And the only thing I could figure to do was just like make an essay-based test and give it to people and just go from there. So that's what that's about. So I think we'll be fine. Yeah, don't plagiarize. Try to not be shitty students. If you need to have academic accommodations, talk to the Office of Counseling and Testing, and we'll get you set up. Here's my addendum. There's my email again. I don't have an office, so if you want to talk outside of class, let me know. We've got like an adjunct office that's just sort of a closet. So if you want to talk outside of class, just let me know. Oh, again, for those of you that haven't had my class before, the exams and the papers are all weighted the same. So, which is to say, the way I've got it set up, the 3 regular tests, the 3 regular tests and the 2 papers, out of those 5, use my counting correctly, I'll drop the lowest one. So everything but the final out of the first 5, whichever is the lowest, I'll drop. So if you mess up a test, but you do fine on the other test, and you do both the papers, I'll drop the test you screwed up on. Or if you do well throughout the semester, you can skip the last paper, or I mean technically you can skip the last test if you want, not the final. I can't drop the final. But the way I've got it set up so you can skip the last paper, because that's when everything else is due and all your other classes. So it just makes it easy for everybody. Also me, because I have less to grade. So yeah, it's just one thing gets dropped at the end of the semester. Unless you decide to do everything, and if it's better for your grade that nothing gets dropped, then I just won't drop anything. That's just how I average it out at the end. Okay, exams. I don't do attendance quizzes because that's dumb. If you miss an exam, let me know when you'll be able to be back and take it, because we have a testing center right next to the front office, and I can get you in there and get you set up, and it'll be fine. It's not a nightmare like it was at Tri-County Tech when it comes to doing makeup exams. As far as the final, I can't have any other class come in here because this room is packed. But if you guys need to be in a different room, we'll talk about that when we get to the final. You guys don't need to worry about that right now. Papers, again, you can use the book for the most part, but you're also welcome and encouraged to use outside sources. Don't plagiarize. I tried to do a calendar back in the day, but it never worked out, so I just don't. Every 3 chapters will have a test. Okay, there's emails again. Blah, 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 blah. A lot of this is not my work. So if you see something that's like really harsh sounding, it's probably not mine. Especially, where's it at? He has something on here about like,
Number 6. That don't sound
yeah, that's not me.
that somebody else.
Yeah, just let me know if there's anything going on. We'll work it out. Okay, so that's the syllabus. It's on Blackboard. Again, a lot of this is not my language. I'm not super weird about essays being late if you've got to turn them in late, but I would like you to get them in as soon as you can. Again, though, we've got until like March, so don't worry about the essay right now. And it's 2 to 3 pages. Like, you can do that in a couple of hours. All right. Any question on the syllabus? Anybody besides Nia? Cool. Let's, with the time we have left, let's actually get into the notes since I missed last week with the plague. All right. Open this up. Oh, nuts. I probably didn't do what I thought I did I? Nope. They didn't see the syllabus at all.
What is that?
That's my online class.
I've never seen that.
Yeah, they were looking at that the whole time. Sorry, online class. You know what the syllabus looks like. Okay. Oh, that's my YouTube studio. Yeah, I just stream it to YouTube. All right, back to extend. And all right. So, the book starts with chapter 14 because they just took one book and split it in two. So if you do get the book, it literally starts on page 425. So, you know, it's just how it works, I guess. Give me some water before we start. Okay. So, this is immediately post-Civil War, and how things shook out in the nation after the war, obviously. So, we actually start before the end of the Civil War to back up the thing to contradict the thing that I just said. So before the end of the Civil War, there were actually pockets of emancipation happening in the South, regions that were occupied by Northern troops, such as the South Carolina Sea Islands, had freed slaves, formed communities under the protection of the Union troops. However, when the troops departed, there were conflicts. Bump the mic again. That's very good. I need to quit talking with my hands. Violence erupted between the freed slaves and the former slave owners because, obviously, and this would be the sign of things to come for the next rest of the forever. Richmond, Virginia, April of 1865. Following the end of the war, freed slaves gathered together singing hymns to express their joy for emancipation. Again, though, this usually only lasted as long as the Union troops were there to keep them safe. Former slave owners would sometimes punish them for these actions, and of course, punishing in this context meaning lynching usually. And we'll have a pretty close look at what that means in a few chapters. Got my hands on some pretty awful images going into the late 1800s, early 1900s. So enters the Freedmen's Bureau, very important organization in this period of history. The full name being the Bureau of Refugees, Freedmen, and Abandoned Lands. It was formed by Congress in 1865, signed into law by President Lincoln. This was to provide aid to ex-slaves, largely in the form of financial and legal resources, because, well, though they were freed from slavery, they were still not citizens. They were not seen as having any real rights, so they're in this weird limbo. In fact, a lot of them from primary source documents we have. Though a lot of them, of course, celebrated their emancipation, many felt a sort of betrayal because even though they were freed from slavery, they were just sort of left out in the cold and with no rights to protect themselves, and thus were the victim of all sorts of violence that they had no recourse to defend against. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So, one of the first goals for the newly freed slaves was to reunite with their families. Because, for those of you that were here last semester, as we saw, a lot of the plantation owners that were moving west often would split up families when they were selling their slaves without any concern because they were completely inhumane. So they would work with the Freedmen's Bureau and Northern Abolitionists to try to track down their family that had been split up. However, this wasn't especially easy because many of the records for slave sales and whatnot were destroyed during the war. As I mentioned in my class yesterday, probably in large part due to General Sherman's march to the sea, in which he burned down a lot of stuff, which, you know, fair, but also fire destroys a lot of records. Anyway, these are the Sea Islands. Those of us living like an hour from the beach, that doesn't seem like anything new to us. But when I taught this originally, I taught this upstate. So they weren't especially familiar with the coast. So we have some more images of the Sea Islands. You know, I mean, again, just like it's the coastline. It's the barrier islands, not so much North Carolina, but down here in the south. Isle of Palms, Hilton Head, that sort of thing. You've got emancipation. This is an interesting design here. You have in the middle the Holy Bible being handed down by God. And the design is actually modeled after an old Catholic design, like the three-paneled, because it was actually a physical like setup where it was like a three-piece of, can't talk. It was three pieces of wood that were set up like a bureau, or a mural rather. But here you've got, you know, God handing down the Bible. You've got Lincoln there to the left with the Emancipation Proclamation, and on the right, the Union soldier himself delivering the news to the newly freed slaves. And this is an anniversary celebration of Emancipation Day in Richmond, Virginia. So they've actually found an image of that, which is pretty cool. And the Freedmen's Bureau here. Oh, yes. This image is in your book. It's a bit further back in the book. There it is. So just to give you guys the same warning I gave my previous class, for those of you that haven't had my class before, I I don't just find pictures and like drawings of stuff as they looked in the past. I also find primary documents of what people were putting out back then, which is to say propaganda. So, yeah, there were some people that didn't appreciate the Freedmen's Bureau and how they kept, let's say, African Americans in idleness at the expense of the white man. Boy, that sure has some charged language to it. Let's just ignore everything else going on in this image. It's fun how certain groups always need to have an enemy that's, out to get them. Anyway. So, the next big thing after finding the family was education. Many among the free black communities believed that getting an education was very important to maintaining and expanding their freedom, which was quite true. They believed they could better understand the politics and policies of the day, and perhaps one day even have a voice. Now, needless to say, they did not have the vote at this time, and again, they weren't even citizens yet. But having an education would at least allow them to understand what was going on to a better degree and push for some kind of rights. Of course, this wasn't easy. Funding for these schools in the South was minimal at best, and it kind of still is. And the demand for these schools was far greater than any kind of region could handle. So they would use courthouses, cotton barns, and even a mule stable in one case as classrooms. Basically, any opportunity to get out of the rain and just pack people in and have class. I'd say we're doing a little better than a mule stable. This might be the warehouse room, but at least we have air conditioning. So the main lesson that every freed slave wanted to learn was reading. It was helpful that they'd be able to read labor contracts to make sure they weren't being exploited, which was very, very common. Because hey, we're free to choose our own labor now. And then the, person writing up the contract would write up a really crappy contract. If they couldn't read it, well, guess it sucks for them. But the primary reason to learn to read was to be able to read the Bible. They would no longer have to sit and listen to Southern preachers claim that the Bible legitimized slavery, even though in a lot of cases it does. They can now read the Bible for themselves. So black churches quickly grew throughout the country. Hiring black preachers, using church buildings as places for gathering, for many communal purposes besides just church, also for political organizing. Now, I want to mention something here, which I mentioned in my previous class as well. My lips peeling. So, there's a saying in education that the two main goals of education are to teach a person to read, and then to teach that person to question everything they read. So first you need to be able to read what's in front of you rather than being told what it says. But then also you need to be able to read that and then critically question whether what it says is true or not. Because, if you can't read what this says on the board, I can tell you it says whatever I want to say. But I say that I got it all from the book. So you could go and check behind me and get the book and check the book and see if it says what I wrote up here. I'm too lazy to write something else. So yeah, it's all very much in the book. But that's the maxim that I don't remember where I heard it, but for education is learn to read and then learn to question what you read. So we have some images of freedmen's schools. I really like this one. They typically had a lot of northern abolitionist ladies heading south to help teach. But this one in particular is neat because you have a lot of, young children, typically we would consider, school children. But you also have a lot of adults because they didn't learn how to read when they were enslaved. So they're coming in too. It's like, yeah, I want to learn how to read. I need to learn how to read. I need to be able to read these labor contracts. And I want to be able to read the Bible. So, hell yeah, I'm coming in to learn to read. That's great. And to me, that's really cool that you've got, again, what you would consider a child around the age that you would expect to be able to be learning to read, but also these adults that never got the chance, and now they're there doing it, which is great. This one, it's slightly less, it's children of different ages, it looks like. I don't think there's as many adults there. This is the Mrs. Cook School room. Yeah, Mrs. Cook School in Freeman's Bureau, Richmond, Virginia. And then there's church. No, big old baptismal. Everybody out in their Sunday best. All right. Now on to the Reconstruction. The proper Reconstruction. So, Lincoln. In December of 1863, Lincoln issued the Proclamation of Amnesty and Reconstruction. He believed the South had not constitutionally seceded from the Union, so it's like, well, they didn't even do it right, so we'll restore them to the Union with minimum standards, just to make things easier. We already had a war. So there were two minor standards. They had to accept the abolition of slavery, and 10% of those eligible to vote, which is to say white Southern men, because again the vote is still very restricted, had to swear an oath of allegiance to the United States. Now, for 10% of white Southern men to swear an oath of allegiance to the United States, that was pretty easy. Again, though we didn't quite get to the Civil War last semester, the Civil War wasn't like everyone in the North versus everyone in the South. There were plenty in the South that were not for the Civil War. So I'd say 10% was a really easy goal. He gave amnesty to all but the highest ranking Confederate officials. Basically every Confederate official except for, I don't remember the guy's name. He ran a prison, a prison, and it was deemed a war crime the way he ran that prison, and he was, I think he was actually executed. And then Jefferson Davis was actually tried for treason and sent to prison, and I think he was actually pardoned. But that was it. Like, everybody else was given amnesty. So in a year and a half, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Tennessee agreed to this 10% plan. However, Republicans in Congress, again, for those of you last semester who don't remember, and those of you that are new, at this time, and really up until Nixon, I believe, the Republicans in the United States were the more liberal party, and the Democrats were the more conservative party. That's why they were called the Dixiecrats. Just to explain some of what's going on here. They wanted harsh restrictions, felt the South should be seen as conquered provinces. The Wade-Davis bill would have raised the 10% to 50%, but Lincoln shot it down with a veto. However, even though Lincoln and Congress did have a bit of sparring back and forth, they did work together with the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery, pushed for unity between the North and the South, wanted to heal the wounds caused by the war, which, you know, was a pretty bad war. However, Lincoln got himself shot, so it was up to Andrew Johnson to take over. And Andrew Johnson is known as one of the worst presidents we've ever had. Still, to this day. So yeah, good work, Andrew Johnson. And, you know, thanks, John Wilkes Booth. You screwed up. Also, even though this is like one of the most famous images of the assassination, it's weird. Like, everybody's got really big heads. That or really tiny hands. One or the other. Anyway, on to Andrew Johnson. We still got like 15 minutes. We got time to do more stuff. So this was a time when the president, the vice president, could be from different parties. So that was weird. Andrew Johnson was a Democrat, so was selected as Lincoln's running mate to try to win border states. Now, also, this was a time when the president and the vice president didn't really have to work together because the vice president didn't really do anything. Like today, the vice president has a bunch of different roles. They have certain ambassadorial roles. They have certain roles in Congress. Like, they do stuff. Back then, the vice president sat on their hands until the president kicked it. And you didn't really expect the president to kick it. As I described it yesterday, the vice president was like the understudy in a play. You were really important if the main actor in the play suddenly got like yellow fever or something, and now you were the star of the play. But 9 times out of 10, you sat behind the scenes and did nothing. However, Lincoln got a bullet in the head, so now Andrew Johnson suddenly got stuff to do. And he wasn't good at doing stuff. So a little background on Johnson. He was born into rural poverty, and he had a chip on his shoulder with the aristocracy of the South. He saw them as the true enemy to be defeated rather than slavery. So he used the Reconstruction to break the power of the Southern elite, which again he saw as a personal enemy, and had no compunction to actually extend rights to the newly freed slaves. In his mind, slavery was merely a tool of the aristocracy, and sure, we can take them away from the aristocracy to weaken them, but he didn't see it as any kind of moral evil, which again is why once, once they were freed, he didn't care what happened to them. So he was very petty. He made rich Southerners petition him directly for amnesty, which is to say they had to come to Washington, which, again, those of you that were here last semester know that Washington was a shitty place to have to travel to. It was all swampy and gross. So they had to travel up to Washington, go to the White House and meet with him personally and beg him for amnesty so they wouldn't be charged with war crimes for supporting the South. And he, for the most part, was like, yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to see you grovel. He was just petty. And for the most part, he let the South take care of itself. He had no push to reconstruct the South. He did have a few requirements. He did push the 13th Amendment, as Lincoln did. They had to revoke the ordinances of secession because, you know, they can't be seceded anymore. That's kind of the point. And also, the United States would not pay off the Confederate war debts, which is to say, the debts that they racked up in their war against the United States was not going to help them pay. You know. However, he was so hands-off that the Confederate Vice President Alexander H. Stephens was elected to the U.S. Senate in Georgia. Because, of course, Georgia. South Carolina and Mississippi refused to repudiate the war debt because, of course, we're going to make the United States pay for us going to war with the United States. And Mississippi refused to ratify the 13th Amendment because Mississippi. I mean, weren't they the ones that only just recently changed their flag? Also, we're going to talk about this in a minute. Because the South was left so much to itself, black codes were passed in many southern states that restricted basic rights, such as bearing arms, intermarriage, and jury duty to the black population, which we'll get to in just a moment. I meant to have this on the next slide. We'll get to that in just a minute. There's Andrew Johnson, as he's often seen in this weird little Shakespearean outfit, like whispering in people's ears, being a creepy jester dude. The cheerful convention. I don't know, there's all this stuff going on. Okay. Something I'd like to discuss before we get to the end. So, who's familiar with the full, well, you don't have to quote it because I don't know what the actual quote is, but who's familiar with the full context of the 13th Amendment? Because it abolishes slavery except for one exception. Except for one exception. Exactly. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery with the exception of imprisonment. And then the South passes specific laws that only target the newly freed slaves. So then the prisons start filling with black people. And then they start using the 13th Amendment to force them into unpaid labor. Oh, also the 13th Amendment and that loophole is still in the books. Like, the black codes technically aren't, but one could argue that the way laws are set up and certain, well, again, way things are set up, still are. Because have you ever heard of convict labor? That's just what that is. So anyway, nation as it was, this is the white nation, the white man's government rather, the White League, the KKK. We'll talk about them later too, yay. Yeah, it was seen as worse than slavery in some cases because while they were enslaved, which is never a good thing, they were relatively safe, while in this case they were being murdered in the streets and the government wasn't doing anything about it. Yeah, we'll finish here. We'll talk about Johnson and the Congress next time. So I'll see you guys next Monday. We'll have a full week next week. Okay, I will, well, you'll see this when I post it up on YouTube. Okay, bye. See you guys on Monday.